Hi, mystery friend. I'm glad you clicked on this video. You get to hear the very first chapter of Hands on Homicide, my 18th mystery. It's wonderful. My narrator is spot on, spunky, and fun. You're going to love her. If you could do me a quick favor and hit subscribe and like before you take a listen to chapter 1, that would make my day. I hope this makes your day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Chapter 1. Spa Life. I drowned in a serenity pond. Well, almost. Peaceful music, slow-flowing water, and a murderous attack. The irony sang to me as I blacked out, watching a rose-gold earbud drift in the current of my last air bubble. Hours before, my shift at Hands on Healing Spa waxed on as normal. Davis Pyle, a fellow masseuse, helped his latest client, an older lady, out to her car. A summer rain thrummed outside the glass doors. He used his raincoat to shield her from the sudden storm. Mr. Tucker Williams, my current client, rolled his shoulders with ease as he paid his bill. "Corky, you're amazing. How do you know exactly where to work?" I shrugged. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. Tucker walked into his appointment with his shoulders rolled in towards his clavicle, a sure sign of tight pectoral muscles. The underlying causes were a broken heart, acute anxiety, and/or deep sadness. My bodywork could only give him so much relief. Instead, Mr. Williams needed to confront his feelings with gentle understanding. However, I wasn't about to tell the macho cowboy to round up his trapped emotions. Instead, I said, "Lots of training. I'm glad it was helpful." "Helpful?" Tucker scoffed. Massage therapy was a passion of mine, and I never stopped training. "Miracle worker," Tucker said to the receptionist and pointed his thumb in my direction. Melinda Carley frowned, as always, when Mr. Williams turned his gaze. She strongly despised the moments when I received compliments. In fact, she despised everything about me. Much like Tucker Williams' trapped trauma, my Melinda problems rested just above my breastbone. "Y'all don't pay her enough," Mr. Williams said with a wink and a smile. "We're so glad you're satisfied," Melinda said, disgust rising in her tone. "Shall we schedule your next visit?" The front door chimed before Tucker could respond, bringing in Mrs. Valerie Hewitt and Miss Emma Woods. The first was a regular client of mine, and the second came once a week for one of Stella Michaels' famous facial treatments. Stella was my best friend and had been since junior high. Miss Woods and Mrs. Hewitt chatted amongst themselves as Davis Pyle joined the queue behind Mr. Williams. Mrs. Hewitt waited beside the counter as Mr. Williams paid Melinda. She grinned at me and motioned me over to her side. I kept one eye on my last client while I made my way to her. I figured Mr. Williams was giving me his usual tip. I hoped that he doesn't give it to Melinda, because if so, I'd never see a dime. "You're early," I said, checking the wall clock. "I thought our appointment was in an hour." "It is, dear," Mrs. Hewitt said. "I have something important to attend to at work, and it can't wait. Could Henry take my spot instead?" Henry was Mr. Hewitt. I didn't bother to ask what was so pressing that she'd give up her hot stone massage. Mrs. and Mr. Hewitt were therapists, so they couldn't tell me if it was work-related. If the stress knot resting on Mrs. Hewitt's shoulders meant anything, it was. "I don't see why that couldn't work," I said. "We'll get Melinda to schedule it." I waved to Melinda, who pocketed my well-deserved tip right before my eyes. She blinked and withdrew one bill, setting it down before me. "Thanks," I said, "but—" Melinda turned back to Mr. Williams, who'd missed the transaction between Mel, as she preferred being called, and me while he signed his credit card receipt. I frowned as Mel ignored me. Stella strolled up and winked in my direction before escorting Miss Woods away. "Can you handle Melinda?" Mrs. Hewitt asked. She checked her watch. "I really have to go." "You've got it," I said. "Don't wait too long to reschedule." Then I can finally get this kink out of my neck. Her hand flew to the offending tensed muscle. "Thanks, Corky," she said as she walked out, followed by the handsome Mr. Williams. Melinda scowled at me before pivoting toward the back room. "Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt are switching places," I told her as she retreated. She hardly flinched. I grumbled around the desk and found the Hewitts' entries. Correcting them was a cinch. Still, Mel would spit venom if she caught me messing with her perfect planner. I returned to the treatment rooms to help Davis organize his area for his next client. One thing I knew for certain was that later Stella and I would have a Melinda venting session. "Is Melinda always like that to you?" Davis asked as the table blankets billowed into place. I loaded the towel warmer as I answered. "Pretty much. I try to ignore it." Davis grunted and slid the headrest into place. "I wouldn't ignore it if I were you. Bullies don't stop because we look the other way. They have to be put in their place." I glanced up at the very serious masseuse. "I'm not sure it's worth the effort. They bullied me badly in high school, made my life a nightmare. But I got even." Davis winked playfully after his foreboding comment. I smiled. "Did you spit in someone's root beer?" Davis laughed. "Something like that." I pushed play on the ambient music and stepped away from the spa. "Did it work?" Davis waved a hand in the air and snapped his fingers. "Never bothered me again." I cradled the soiled sheets in my hand. "Maybe I'll have to try it," I said as Davis met me in the hall. He turned toward reception. "You won't regret it," he said, "and I'll have your back." I chuckled. Davis was new in town, but already a friendly addition to the spa. His banter with me and Stella drove Mel crazy. The perk made every shift breeze by. At last, afternoon ticked into the evening, and the day wrapped to a close. Stella Michaels knocked on the door to my therapy room. Her big brown eyes cast the snarky attitude that made her one of my favorite people. "Hey, Corky," Stella said. "Guess who's signing in?" I placed my hands on my hips and took in the spotless room, which was all prepped for the weekend without me. It was a weekend I hoped would come early. Hands on Healing, the spa I worked for, held to a strict grace period. 10 minutes past the hour, the spa canceled the client's appointment, charged their credit card, and handed the therapist a short reprieve from duty. Mr. Hewitt was 30 minutes behind schedule. "No," I whined. "She didn't." Stella clicked her spearmint gum against her molars. "Melinda's sending him back as soon as he pays." "Pays beforehand?" My best friend's eyebrows peaked in disdain. "Yup," she said, knowing that Melinda not only shoved my weekend farther back, but stiffed my tip. "Again!" I was livid. Stella continued. "Miss Woods will be in the quiet room after her next treatment. Honestly, I don't know why she bothers with the quiet room. She's always plugged into one of her Lonely Hearts podcasts. I think she has at least one earbud docked in place, even during her treatments. It's insulting." Stella crossed her arms. Her final facial of the day was finished. She was as ready for Friday as I was. "Good thing she's nice," I retorted, defending the town's most popular high school counselor and teacher. Stella rolled her eyes. "Good thing she let me ace government." Stella nearly repeated 12th grade because of her year of teen angst. She hosted a grin of nostalgia. Miss Woods was a young soul, and coached Stella instead of allowing her to flunk. "Mr. Hewitt is the last massage of the day. Melinda's logging him in, and then she's leaving. Meanwhile, I get to treat Mr. Hewitt past closing, clean, and lock up." I groaned. "Yup." Stella snapped her gum once more. "You get to do your job, and hers, and I get to hit up the grocery store while she starts her weekend early with Brett Booker." My skin chilled after hearing my ex's name. Bad history didn't describe my past with Brett and Melinda. Our past tracked back into high school. I shuddered, striving to shake off the coldness from the thought. Melinda loved to prod me with every hot poker she could find. No doubt she'd walk Mr. Hewitt to the room and use her saccharine front desk voice to explain Mr. Hewitt's lateness and my assumed happiness to accommodate him. I could sense her snotty smile before I heard her heels clip down the hall. Stella winked at me. "I'll bring you coffee." "No sugar," I added. "Of course," Stella added as she shot finger guns at me. "Besides, Steve's planned a whole tapas-themed meal. He wouldn't want to waste your carbs on simple syrup." "Sounds awesome," I said, with excitement in my voice. I was thrilled that Stella's brother enjoyed studying for his culinary class by spoiling us. "Don't rush," Stella added. "Dinner isn't until 8. We've got time to decompress before Chef Steve gets frantic. I smiled as Stella accidentally knocked into Melinda while she and Mr. Hewitt swung into view, proving my hypothesis. I stood face to face with Melinda, leaving my client to get comfy on the table. She snarled. "Your friend doesn't have to be such a twerp." "You know her name," I pointed out. According to Melinda, everything was my fault, and she enjoyed blaming me. Sure, Stella was my bestie, but she was also Melinda's coworker and fellow alumni of Dead Horse Canyon High. Melinda ignored me. "Did she tell you I'm leaving?" "Forever?" I whispered. If Melinda caught my dig, she pretended I hadn't spoken. "I'm tidying up the front desk," she continued. "I would appreciate it if you and Stella kept your hands off the schedule." I assumed she meant me penciling Mr. Hewitt into Mrs. Hewitt's place, as if erasing an S was going to ruin her precious system. I was trying to sign in a new client today, which was embarrassing, as if scribbling over names isn't unprofessional enough. You can't tear out pages whenever you feel like it. I didn't know what she was griping about and didn't care to find out. I loved my job, even if it meant late clients and braving a passive-aggressive receptionist. When my client knocked on the wall, I counted to 10 and gladly ditched Melinda in the hallway.